I think it is interesting because so many people are talking about Trump's tariffs and the idea of hurting the dollar here. Again, the only way that I feel comfort in this is that regardless of how it shakes out, nothing fundamentally has changed, is that Bitcoin, the hardest money out there, is a pretty good bet if you think that governments, especially ones as strong as the US, are going to continue needing to print more money.
We have had completely irresponsible fiscal policy for far too long. Both sides of the aisle are just as guilty of spending way too much and not keeping our finances in order. And this is putting, an incredible amount of debt on the younger generations that we will have to pay off and give to our grandkids, and it will be inherited to the younger generations. And that's just wrong. And if we can use Bitcoin to strengthen the US dollar because it is the best performing asset in the world, and we can use that to help pay down our debt and get back to fiscal responsibility, I think that's really in the best interest of Americans.
We are just days away from the biggest election, you could say, in years here in the U.S. And it's not just the presidency that we'll be watching. There are a lot of key races in Congress to pay attention to, and it will have huge ramifications for the world of crypto. And excited to have back on Coinage with us today to discuss all of that and more, Perianne Boring, the founder at the Digital Chamber. Perianne, great to see you.
What's up, Zach? Good to be here.
It's, this is busy times for you, I'm sure, because all of these races are so close. It's wild. And I think it's really cool to think about this, not just in terms of like who's going to win, but Politico was just out with an article looking at, regardless of how this all shakes out, it's going to be probably the most friendly Congress towards crypto we've ever had. So obviously, clearly a lot of work has gone into educating everyone up until this point. But it's so razor thin, Perianne. I mean, when you look at this election, what are you watching right now for what it means for crypto?
I mean, this is obviously a very important election for crypto. The past 4 years, we've had major setbacks with the current administration, not just being anti-crypto, but, essentially trying to kill crypto and push it offshore. And, they were relatively successful at doing that. I've long said digital assets, crypto, blockchain technology should not be a partisan issue. We've worked very, very hard at the Digital Chamber to keep this nonpartisan, and it really didn't become partisan until the Biden administration and until Elizabeth Warren went on her, anti-crypto army pursuit over the past couple of years. So as someone on the ground working in the halls of Congress, working throughout the policy community, I can tell you there's a huge groundswell of support from both Republicans and Democrats for digital assets. That was extremely emblematic this summer when the Congress voted 2 digital asset bills that both received overwhelming bipartisan support. The first one was that SAB 121 vote that, Zach, you were reporting on very closely. That received bipartisan support in both the House and Senate, passed both the House and Senate. And then, of course, there was the market structure bill that went through the House that received very significant support from both Republicans and Democrats. So we have an opportunity to push out a lot of these extremely what's the right word for it? I want to say
I would say disingenuous actors. Yes,
non-common sense policies that have been driven, through a political agenda. So we can get back to just discussing the technology and making sure we have a legal framework so companies can build in this space in a responsible way.
No, it's been fascinating. I mean, it's been exciting to see kind of some of the pushback mount, as you said, bipartisan votes in Congress to really put pressure on the Biden administration to say, hey, look, maybe the SEC is handling this terribly, especially when you got, commissioners like Hester Peirce saying that they are handling it terribly and that it's not good to have special carve-outs for big banks here. But you are right that the pushback has come pretty strongly from those who are now facing battles in their own backyard, including Elizabeth Warren, who you're just talking about there. It is interesting how many other races right now, though, as crypto PACs continue to spend. I think in that Politico article, we have a map of kind of how many different seats right now are kind of being are up for grabs when it comes to how much money in crypto is now trying to support some of those races. And I'll use the Elizabeth Warren example, Perianne, because it's perhaps the most obvious one, since she was so anti-crypto and is leading kind of the charge in cracking down on crypto. In the debate with John Deaton, I want to play a little bit of the clip there because it seems like something that all of those people who are anti-crypto are probably saying right now, which is if you're getting this much money from crypto, they're going to want a return on their investment. Here's what she said at the debate. I want to get your reaction to it on the other side. Take a listen to one of those disingenuous actors, shall we say, Elizabeth Warren.
There's one candidate standing here who gets 90% of the funding to keep their campaign going from one industry, the crypto industry. One candidate who has said quite openly that his personal worth is 80% tied up in crypto. Look, people of Massachusetts know me. You know I fight for everybody, fight for working people. If John Deaton has a chance to go to Washington, his crypto buddies are going to want a return on their investment. He's going to be there to fight for crypto.
Now, she's saying fight for crypto is like a bad thing there. I think, like, obviously all of our viewers, you and me, would probably say that it's not a bad thing. But I mean, anytime you have money in politics, there are those questions. How have you kind of seen the reaction to it as the industry stepped up to support their candidates?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is just politics at its best and at its worst. And, politicians can take anything and spin it into a narrative that fits their agenda. The reason why I endorsed John Deaton is because he's really shown that he's an advocate and a protector of consumer investors. You have to know who he is, and I've had the opportunity to work with him for many, many years alongside of him, not in any formal way, but we were both involved in the same case. That was the Ripple case against the SEC. And he brought a pro bono case to represent the consumer holders of the XRP token. So if you haven't been following this case, what happened is the Securities and Exchange Commission sued the company Ripple, and they alleged that the XRP token was a security. When this happened, the XRP token was the third largest token by market cap. It had a multi-billion-dollar market cap. This token had been circulating for, I want to say, 8 years, maybe 5 years. Don't quote me on the exact number, but many, many years. So at this time, who are the owners of the XRP token? A lot of it is your consumers. So when the SEC filed this lawsuit alleging it was a security, all of the exchanges delisted the token, and who was left holding the bag? The consumers, the retail investors. So John Deaton brought a pro bono case to ensure that the retail investors, who were the ones most hurt by what had happened, had a voice through that case. This was a pro bono case. He was not paid for it. He didn't work for any crypto bros or billionaires. He represented just normal retail consumers, and that's how he got his start in the crypto space. He actually acted as a real advocate and put his own money on the line to do that. So when we say, oh, he owes these crypto billionaires a favor because they funded him, no, they're supporting him because he deserved that. He was the one who actually went to bat to protect just normal people. And it's really interesting that it's Elizabeth Warren who's the one bringing these allegations, because Elizabeth Warren has spent her entire career campaigning on being that consumer advocate. But where was Elizabeth Warren when consumers were being hurt by these crazy enforcement actions after the crypto industry, when retail investors were losing money? Nowhere. Yeah. She was out there demonizing everyone. So he has an actual track record of protecting consumers, while Elizabeth Warren's just a politician who is campaigning on being a consumer advocate, but with no actual track record of doing so.
Certainly not in the crypto space, for sure. I think it has been interesting to see her now and really see her operate in the bank hearing, where you had Jamie Dimon and everybody else, and John Deaton attacked her for this too, in kind of how friendly she was when it comes to crypto, and also working with Gary Gensler, by the way, for the SOB 121 kind of banking carve out for a lot of the banks to now do what the SEC had for so long said was a no-no in terms of custodying digital assets. So it has been interesting to kind of see her 180 in kind of going from being like a big bad I hate banks to kind of being like I'm the bank's friends against crypto now. But you mentioned that race, and I think looking at some of the stats there, it's a pretty wide margin. Obviously, Elizabeth Warren, perhaps one of the most known politicians, right? And so John Deaton has an uphill battle here in the state of Massachusetts. But I think, as we were talking before this, it doesn't even matter if he loses so much, I think, in this race. And I guess a fair question, Perianne, is what is the potential outcome here? Like, what's the goal in a race like that? Even if John Deaton does challenge her and loses, I think a lot of the record's been exposed. And I think to your point that you made before, there's still a lot of groundswell in terms of a candidate coming out and trying to make these points, education, that still comes from a race like this. So what are you kind of expecting to see as we approach Election Day?
Well, I think it's important that we send a clear message to Washington that the people do not stand with any efforts or attempts to restrict the people's access to cryptocurrencies, to open source technology. So I think it's incredibly important to have people like John Deaton going up against the biggest critics of crypto, adding that counter narrative and ensuring that the industry has a voice and is not just steamrolled by a political agenda.
Yeah, no, it's important. And I think, again, it's not just happening in Massachusetts in this battle, it's happening across the country. And I want to get your high level take, Perianne, in terms of the races to watch and the balance of power right now, because as we were talking about as well, it seems like the Republicans are going to regain control of the Senate if the races that are right now kind of up in the air shake out the way that a lot of people are expecting them to, which seems pretty important when you consider how pro-crypto Republicans in general, the party has shifted. It made it into its party platform this year. So what are you looking at in terms of the balance of power shifts in the key races outside of Massachusetts?
Yeah, so in the Senate, Democrats are defending 23 seats and Republicans are defending 11 seats. Of the all Republican seats that Republicans are defending, those are districts or states that lean Republican. So it's almost a foregone conclusion that the Senate will flip under Republican control. Just given how many seats Democrats are defending and the fact that in polls it looks like Republicans have already won that one seat that they need to take the majority. The House is a little bit more of a toss-up. It's harder to say which way it could go. I think it could go either way. It's very, very close in a number of districts. But I think that on the House side, in a lot of these open seats, we have pro-crypto people running all over the country. So we're actually very optimistic that our House, the U.S. House, regardless of which direction it goes, will have a very large pro-crypto constituency.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see kind of how both chambers shake out. But there are a few races that have been fascinating to watch, and people I've interviewed, by the way. Sherrod Brown in Ohio. This one seems like it's been a huge race. Bernie Moreno has been making the rounds. He's been in a lot of conferences. I think he was speaking with you in D.C.
Yeah, he spoke at our event. Yeah,
Yeah.
It is a big race. Hundreds of millions of dollars are being spent in the Ohio Senate race.
Yeah.
And it's super interesting. You have Senator Sherrod Brown, who's the chair of the Banking Committee. He's been in office for almost 30 years. He's one of the most powerful members of the Democratic Party. And going up against him is Bernie Moreno, who's a former cryptocurrency entrepreneur. And he also had, he spent his whole career in business. He owns car dealerships around the state as well. But in Ohio, the numbers are really, really interesting. So in the 2020 election, they only had 49% voter turnout. So they did not have, great voter participation rate. According to NPR, there's 2 million cryptocurrency owners in the state of Ohio. And 60% of crypto owners are Gen Z or millennials. So I do think this is a state where crypto could have the majority, where just a small fraction of those 2 million cryptocurrency owners showed up to the vote and voted for Bernie, the cryptocurrency entrepreneur. It could knock out one of the most senior Democratic members of the U.S. Congress, Sherrod Brown. So this would be an incredible message to send to Washington that, again, the people do not stand with any efforts to restrict the people's access to cryptocurrencies. And make no mistake that Sherrod Brown has been Elizabeth Warren's partner in crime and ensuring that crypto does not have an opportunity to thrive in the United States.
Yeah, it's one of those races. It's basically the flip side of the John Deaton race in the fact that this one's extremely close. We just showed kind of the polling there. I mean, that's within the margin of error for sure, 47-46. I mean, it's a tight one. And I guess to your point on that, Perianne, like if the outcome from this is, yes, crypto is spending money to energize people, if Coinbase and Stand With Crypto is trying to spend money to throw kind of community events around the U.S. to get people to the polls, that seems in general like a pretty good outcome for the country regardless. I mean, if you have higher voter participation rates, and I know that you also at the Digital Chamber put out a new survey kind of looking at what people in politics or what candidates should consider when it comes to looking at crypto voters. And I think for so long, people thought it was a very small block, but your guys' research says otherwise. So what are kind of some of the high points here to highlight from your guys' survey?
Yeah, I mean, we really found incredible data from our survey that we just released a couple of days ago. This is the crypto voting block national poll. The crypto voting block is 1 in 7 likely or active voters. So it's not 1 in 7 registered voters. It's 1 in 7 of the active voters, people that are most likely to show up to the polls, say that cryptocurrency is a determining factor in who they will vote for. That's over 16% of likely voters, and it's about 23 million Americans across the country. So I think for a long time, people have said, or I think underestimated how important cryptocurrency is an issue for Americans. But what the polling and what the data is showing is that we're seeing a very incredible shift in politics, where for so many years it's been social issues that have really had the spotlight, and crypto is closely behind.
Yeah, and it's obviously, again, one of those things that is anytime, maybe it's not surprising, anytime you got an industry that's now putting up the most money in terms of super PACs, that it's going to be talked about more. But it is increasingly talked about more. And you could say, okay, it's because of the money, or you could say it's because it's become an issue that a lot of Americans are participating in, so they want to see those rights defended. And I think both are pretty fair. And I think the other interesting thing that you highlighted in this survey is that candidates themselves actually stand to gain quite a bit on the net trade-off. And we're kind of seeing that now at the presidential election in that race. And we're going to get into that in a second. But I think it's an important takeaway with that, even though you might lose some people who are like, hey, stop talking about crypto. On the margin, you gain is basically the way that I'm interpreting this data.
Yeah, that is what the data is showing us, that candidates that have a pro-crypto policy position would likely have a positive impact at the polls. And I know this may be a little bit small on your screen, but the numbers are actually very similar between Democrats and Republicans, which also shows that this is a nonpartisan issue. But it's 25% of Democrats and 21% of Republicans say that a candidate having a pro-crypto stance would make them more likely to vote for that candidate. And then the flip side, these are very, very small numbers. Only 2% of Democrats and only 3% of Republicans say they would be much less likely to vote for somebody if they have a pro-crypto stance. So candidates potentially have the opportunity to gain support from anywhere from 21 to 25% of likely voters, but would only lose or alienate maybe 2 or 3%. So being pro-crypto, for a candidate to have a pro-crypto stance, is actually very risk adjusted. We see very little downside of being pro-crypto, but huge opportunity by understanding this technology and being able to have a thoughtful policy position on it.
Yeah, and I think when we back up and just think about, obviously, if you've got two candidates going head to head at the presidential level right now in Trump and Kamala Harris, it has been interesting to see the evolution in both candidates when it comes to crypto, right? I mean, we've talked about Trump before. Last time you were on, I think we were talking about kind of how he's evolved from going from calling Bitcoin a scam to speaking at the Bitcoin conference, and how you've got Kamala Harris basically coming out of the Biden administration to now saying, no, I want to be pro-crypto and have this reset with the industry, though details are sparse. I think it is important to maybe look at a report from the Committee on a Responsible Budget, I'm pretty sure if I'm getting that right, looking at kind of the two candidates in their spending right now, because I think a lot of the reason why people love Bitcoin, Perianne, is because it's basically a hedge on government spending and the idea of inflation and the idea of debt racking up. And certainly we see that year after year, and neither candidate is putting out a plan that's not going to continue contributing to that. It does seem, though, that President Trump's plan, according to their numbers, and again, this is a bipartisan institute, so no dog in either fight here, you're going to be adding a bunch of money to the debt regardless of who wins. And so I think if you're sitting there as a pro-crypto user, such as myself, or such as yourself, or anyone who's really like into the idea of reeling in spending, it seems like either candidate's probably going to help crypto if this is kind of what we're going to inherit this time around.
Well, as you may recall from the Bitcoin conference, the Republicans have a couple of different proposals. One of which is pending in the U.S. Senate to use Bitcoin to pay off the U.S. debt. So one of the things Trump has not elaborated on, but he was quoted widely in the media just in the past couple of weeks, as he said, maybe we'll pay off the $35 trillion of debt with crypto. So what do you think he meant by that? Well, it was Bobby Kennedy who really outlined this plan, but now Bobby Kennedy has endorsed Trump and is part of the Trump team. His plan was to buy 4 million Bitcoin and use that to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And then it was Senator Lummis who introduced the bill to say the strategic Bitcoin reserve can only be used to pay off the U.S. debt. So it's, we haven't seen anything from, any Democrat members to do the same. But when it comes to fiscal policy, I do actually think this is one of the most important issues facing all Americans today. We have had completely irresponsible fiscal policy for far too long. Both sides of the aisle are just as guilty of spending way too much and not keeping our finances in order. And this is putting, an incredible amount of debt on the younger generations that we will have to pay off and give to our grandkids, and it will be inherited to the younger generations. And that's just wrong. Yeah. It's completely irresponsible fiscal policy. And I do think it has the potential, and I think it is absolutely making the US dollar less attractive. It potentially could allow us to dwindle in US dollar dominance globally. This is a conversation that I don't think is tracked in the mainstream media a lot, but you have the BRICS who are building their own monetary regime. You have China and Russia have left the OPEC deal where they're now selling oil in their own respective currencies. I don't think most people really understand the implications of the petrodollar breaking down. But if we lose the world reserve currency status of the United States, this would be the biggest national security risk to the U.S. And if we can use Bitcoin to strengthen the U.S. dollar, because it is the best performing asset in the world, and we can use that to help pay down our debt and get back to fiscal responsibility, I think that's really in the best interest of Americans.
I think it is really interesting, though, because politically, you can't really come out as a candidate and say, especially one like Trump, and say, hey, look, I'm going to be super pro Bitcoin now to the detriment of the U.S. dollar, because whether or not it's real and whether or not it's correct to look at it that way, I feel like a lot of voters do see Bitcoin as this big, bad monster that's competing with the dollar. And Trump himself has said that. He says, whenever he's asked, like, hey, what do you think about Bitcoin? He's like, well, look, I'm pro-dollar. And so it is kind of strange to think about the U.S. holding Bitcoin in a strategic reserve to support the dollar. But he was just asked by Bloomberg on this panel about kind of his economic plans and how that might be harmful to the dollar. And now, as a crypto person, you could make the case pretty easily, I think, that if the dollar gets weaker, it's generally better for Bitcoin. But I just want to play what he said in his response, because he did not like the line of questioning in terms of his economic plan potentially adding to debt and, to your point, perhaps hurting the dollar. But here's what happens when he got asked. Take a listen.
I was actually quite kind to you. I used 7 trillion. The upper estimate is 15 trillion. People like the Wall Street Journal, who's hardly a communist organization,
yeah, but you don't know.
They have criticized you on this as well. You are running up enormous debts.
What does the Wall Street Journal know? I'm meeting with them tomorrow. What does the Wall Street Journal know? They've been wrong about everything. So have you, by the way. You've been wrong about it.
You're trying to turn this. You're trying to turn this.
You've been wrong about it.
So he basically came on at him. But I mean, he was using the same numbers we just talked about from a bipartisan group. So he was saying 7 on the high end, 15 trillion in terms of Trump's plan. And so, I mean, when you look at that, it's real data. But I think it is interesting because so many people are talking about Trump's tariffs and the idea of hurting the dollar here. I don't know, Perianne. I mean, I guess again, the only way that I feel comfort in this is that regardless of how it shakes out, nothing fundamentally has changed. Is that Bitcoin, the hardest money out there, is a pretty good bet if you think that governments, especially ones as strong as the U.S., are going to continue needing to print more money.
Yeah, so I don't buy into the idea that Bitcoin and the US dollar are in competition. In fact, I think that's a pretty dangerous conversation to have, and I don't agree with that at all. Bitcoin and fiat currency are two completely different things. They operate on extremely different systems. They have different monetary policy. They're for completely different uses. These two things can coexist, and in fact, they have for many, many years. And again, Bitcoin is the best performing asset in the world. And the decline of the US dollar has a lot to do with our irresponsible fiscal policy and our out of control monetary policy, which again, both sides of the aisle are guilty of doing. Getting back to sound monetary principles would help strengthen the US dollar. There's been multiple proposals to get back to sound money using Bitcoin, using precious metals again. We need to protect the purchasing power of the dollar. We need to protect the dominance of the dollar. What we've been doing for the past 40 years has not been working. It's time to do something different, and we should be harnessing the power and the potential of Bitcoin and blockchains to preserve the dollar's dominance for the next generation.
Yeah, I think in general, I think everyone in crypto would agree with that point. I do think it is interesting to start to see politicians now make the trade-offs and the calls around, hey, how do we explain this? And it's taken time, right? Like voters in 2014 needed to learn a lot. Voters here in 2024, things look very different than they did in crypto land back then. So it has been interesting to watch it all unfold and evolve. But Perianne, just to kind of like step back and think about this, as we opened on this interview, again, the Politico report saying that regardless of how this shakes out, things are going to be better. I'm an optimist. I want to believe that. You've been in the trenches, going head to head with a lot of these congressmen and women about educating them and showing them how crypto can be a force for good in the U.S. I mean, as far as maybe getting things done in D.C., I don't want to discount all the things that we talked about in terms of bipartisan support for, critiquing the SEC and their SOB 121 debacle. But for kind of the next wave, what are those things that still need to be resolved? What are you going to be watching to see how this all shakes out to then look ahead to those battles? Because as much as we've got done, it does seem like certainly Patrick McHenry, chair of the Financial Services Committee in the House, wanted to get more done and didn't really fully get there.
Well, there's still a lot of bipartisan and bicameral support for comprehensive market structure legislation and stablecoin legislation. So negotiations and talks are still underway for this Congress to get stablecoin legislation done. Again, there's only a few days left in the legislative calendar before the Congress expires. So that is a tall order, but it is not dead. So that is still underway. Regardless of what happens this year, again, we still have very large bipartisan and bicameral support for both legislation. So we are very, very well positioned going into 2025 to getting legislation done. And if we can get market structure done, this would address probably 70% of the challenges that crypto businesses and investors have at building in the United States. And that would be a massive step forward. And again, it has bipartisan support. So we are very well positioned going into next year.
Yeah, that has been one of those big, it's Fit 21, if I do recall, the idea of kind of clarifying the rules in terms of where some of these tokens can stop being a security and kind of having it be outside of the SEC's domain. And of course, all that could change. If you have someone else who's pro-crypto in the SEC, Gary Gensler's out, all of that could change rather quickly. The last piece, though, Perianne, that I wanted to get your take on, too, is just at the presidential level, what you make of kind of what we've seen play out. I don't know which polls to look at, and I don't know whether or not, now that Polymarket has been accused of market manipulation out there, I don't know whether or not we should look at Polymarket odds saying that you got a 61% chance here, and obviously this is just a market. A poll showing way closer 50-50. Which one are you kind of like most using as the arbiter of where the country's at? Is it more that race? Is it more the Senate races you discussed? I mean, how is Perianne going to judge on your report card that this was an A+, a B-, or whatever it may be for this election cycle for crypto?
Well, I mean, at the presidential level, there's, a lot of things that go into these polls. So, I think you kind of have to take them all with a grain of salt. And then each campaign, they have their own internal polls, and we never even see those. So sometimes it's kind of hard. I mean, I've just been telling people, I think it's a coin flip. I think it could go either way. I do think a Trump administration, we'd have a lot more fun because we have, a candidate who's made a lot of promises that wants to really develop a full legal framework for the United States to lead in cryptocurrency. And that's very exciting. On the other side, with the Harris administration, we have been encouraged to see some positive statements from Vice President Kamala on crypto, but unfortunately, we really don't have any substance to anything that she is saying. However, because she is in power as the vice president, we do have the track record that she's running on. And this administration has been, very, very poor on crypto. And even since she's taken the Democratic nominee, there's been a number of actions out of the administration that have gone after and demonized cryptocurrency companies. So on one hand, it's good to have some positive statements, but we need real action. And the action that we're seeing is not great. Either way, our team at the Digital Chamber is going to be prepared for whatever. We're ready for whichever direction this is going to go. We're going to continue to be advocates for the cryptocurrency community. We have very different strategies based on which results we get in November.
Yeah, I think to the race that you brought up earlier, one of these interesting ones to be watching is in Pennsylvania, I think. Just looking at kind of the momentum, similar to kind of what we've seen in the Trump polling as well, a late surge from a Republican candidate here as we approach that race. As you mentioned, it's going to be kind of 1 seat, 2 seats that could change the balance of power here. So, like, as much as everyone likes focusing on the presidential election, you've been early in terms of at least telling us in our community here at Coinage, don't pay so much attention that you lose focus on all the other races. And so, I don't know. It's a huge night. I can't remember an election that's going to be as big as this one. But to your point, so much work has been done. I think looking back on the last 4 years, so much education has been had around crypto and what Bitcoin could mean for Americans. And so, again, congrats to you guys at the Digital Chamber for what you've done to educate people. It's always been fascinating to watch this play out in D.C. And when I was down there, you got people so far on other sides here where crypto is both a scam and also the promise that will solve all of our problems. And it's just fascinating to see the back and forth. But Perianne, I love our convos. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, this has been great, and we're very optimistic going into 2025. I mean, it's obviously going to be an exciting election to see what happens, but I think crypto is well positioned, and I think the U.S. is well positioned to be the global leader of this technology, and we're going to help usher that and make that happen.
From your lips to God's ears, we'll be here along the ride to make sure that happens as well, as we've always done. It's a pleasure to cover some of these debates and live votes here on Coinage as well. We'll continue to play our part for that. But Perianne, thank you so much for coming on, the founder of the Digital Chamber. We'll be watching.
Great to see you, Zach.